So today we are continuing our delving into the history of hidden societies, secret societies, and mystery schools. This is part 3. And in this one we're checking out 3 hidden cults, 3 secret cults of the ancient world. We're going to be taking a look at the Eleusinian Mysteries, the Orphic Mysteries, and the Dionysian Mysteries. These 3 cults, and they were extremely interesting indeed. You know, in some of them, initiates were given a brew, a certain drink that would instill visions in them, and we're going to be talking about that and its possible connection to psychedelics and LSD. And in others, people would enter into a state of intoxication and frenzied madness to feel the God within. They were very interesting, and we're going to be taking a look at all of them, the different rites that they would do, and just in general what they were all about. It's really good. Some of these are you know, the Dionysian mysteries are very important to me and what we do here, and we can learn from all this. We're going to see that Plato was part of the Eleusinian Mysteries and took part in their rites, and we can see, you know, if this was a big influence on his philosophy. So we're going to be getting into that, and I want to show you real quick what we will be looking at. This is the section of the book, and you can see the beautiful imagery here. This is where we will be reading from. But before we begin, I want to tell you guys, I want to remind you that on December 24th, that's Christmas Eve, we are having our anti-Christmas drunk Bible reading frenzy. Our own anti-initiatory Dionysian rite, if you will. So it's going to be good. It's going to be very blasphemous. Make sure you are there. It's December 24th, 4 p.m. Pacific time. That's Christmas Eve. It's a Thursday. You better be there. And I'm going to reveal to you a secret. So I have a lot planned for that day. It's going to be a lot of fun. You don't want to miss it. But I'm going to share with you one thing that we're going to be doing. So I have this is a snow machine. And this thing is huge. It shoots 40 feet from what I read. 40 feet. And this is probably what, 10 feet, 8 feet? I don't know. It's not very large. So I have not tried this yet. For the first time on the stream, I'm gonna start this up and try it out with you guys, and I'm a little nervous to do it because it's not supposed to be done in this small of a space. I'm not even gonna. I've turned it on just to hear how loud it is. I haven't tried it, but it's like a leaf blower. This thing is powerful, so I don't know what the hell it's going to do in my tiny little studio here. But it's going to be good. So make sure you're there. We have a lot planned. It's going to be crazy. You don't want to miss it. It's going to be blasphemous. It's going to be heretical, and just all good all around. It's time to take the Christ out of Christmas, right? So restore its pagan roots and all that. All right, but now that that's out of the way, let's get into the reading. So the Ancient Mysteries and Secret Societies, Part 3, and we are checking out the 3 secret cults of the ancient world. Now, the most famous of the ancient religious mysteries, these were also called mystery cults, okay? So the most famous of the ancient religious mystery cults were the Eleusinian, whose rites were celebrated every 5 years in the city of Eleusis to honor Ceres, Demeter, Rhea, or Isis, and her daughter Persephone. The initiates of the Eleusinian school were famous throughout Greece for the beauty of their philosophic concepts and the high standards of morality which they demonstrated in their daily lives. Because of their excellence, these mysteries spread to Rome and Britain, and later the initiations were given in both these countries. The Eleusinian Mysteries, named for their community in Attica, where the sacred dramas were first presented, are generally believed to be founded by Eumolpos about 1400 years before the birth of Christ, and through the Platonic system of philosophy, their principles have been preserved to modern times. And yes, so this is true. Plato what took part in the Eleusinian Mysteries, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that. I would right now, but I want to see if Manly P. Hall mentions it, and if it does, if he does, I'll discuss it at the appropriate time. But the rites of Eleusis, with their mystic interpretations of nature's most precious secrets, overshadowed the civilizations of their time and gradually absorbed many smaller schools, incorporating into their own system whatever valuable information these lesser institutions possessed. Heckthorn sees in the mysteries of Ceres and Bacchus a metamorphosis of the rites of Isis and Osiris, and there is every reason to believe that all so-called secret schools of the ancient world were branches from one philosophic tree, which, with its roots in heaven and its branches on earth, is, like the spirit of man, an invisible but ever-present cause of the objectified vehicles that give it expression. The mysteries were the channels through which the one philosophic light was disseminated, and their initiates, resplendent with intellectual and spiritual understanding, were the perfect fruitage of the divine tree, bearing witness before the material world of the recondite source of all light and truth. So you had these ancient mystery schools, these mystery cults, where you had individuals come into them. They were sworn to secrecy, and they were taught the hidden truth. And the rites of Eleusis were divided into what were called the lesser and greater mysteries. So according to James Gardner, the lesser mysteries were celebrated in the spring, probably at the time of the vernal equinox, in the town of Agré, and the greater in the fall, the time of the autumnal equinox at Eleusis or Athens. It is supposed that the former were given annually and the latter every 5 years. The rituals of the Eleusinians were highly involved, and to understand them required a deep study of Greek mythology, which they interpreted in its esoteric light with the aid of their secret keys. So, the lesser mysteries were dedicated to Persephone. In his Eleusinian and Bacchic mysteries, Thomas Taylor sums up their purpose as follows. The lesser mysteries were designed by the ancient theologists, their founders, to signify occultly the condition of the unpurified soul invested with an earthly body and enveloped in a material and physical nature. So, according to Thomas Taylor, these lesser mysteries were designed by the founders to signify the condition that the unpurified soul is invested with an earthly body and enveloped in a material and physical nature. And speaking about the Eleusinian Mysteries, there are these fantastic quotes by Plato. I'll have to look them up later. But essentially, Plato talks about how the body is a sort of prison for the soul. How the body, or how the soul looks through the eyes. The soul looks through the eyes of the body as a prisoner looks through the bars of a prison. So the legend used in the lesser rites is that of the abduction of the goddess Persephone, the daughter of Ceres, by Pluto, the lord of the underworld, or Hades. So while Persephone is picking flowers in a beautiful meadow, the earth suddenly opens up, and the gloomy lord of death, riding in a magnificent chariot, emerges from its somber depths, grasping in her in his arms, and carries the screaming and struggling goddess to his subterranean palace, where he forces her to become his queen. So it's doubtful whether many of the initiates themselves understood the mystic meaning of this allegory, for most of them apparently believed that it referred solely to the succession of the seasons. So, most people, probably didn't understand what it was really about. Most people probably thought that it had something to do with the different seasons, the seasons. You have the, picking flowers in a beautiful meadow, and then Hades sort of stealing this away. You can see this having to do with different seasons. But that wasn't its true meaning, but that's what probably people took it for. Now, it is difficult to obtain satisfactory information concerning the mysteries because the candidates were bound by inviolable oaths never to reveal their inner secrets to the profane. So, it's hard to obtain information because those who took part were sworn to secrecy. Now, at the beginning of the ceremony of initiation, the candidate stood upon the skins of animals sacrificed for the purpose and vowed that death should seal his lips before he would divulge the sacred truths which were about to be communicated to him. Through indirect channels, however, some of their secrets have been preserved. The teachings given to the neophytes were substantially as follows. The soul of man, often called the psyche, and in the Eleusinian Mysteries symbolized by Persephone, is essentially a spiritual thing. Its true home is in the higher worlds, where, free from the bondage of material form and material concepts, it is said to be truly alive and self-expressive. The human or physical nature of man, according to this doctrine, is a tomb, a quagmire, a false and impermanent thing, the source of all sorrow and suffering. Plato describes the body as the sepulchre of the soul, and by this he means not only the human form, but also the human nature, that the human form and human nature sort of acts as a prison. So you can see that, Persephone is symbolized as the soul in its purity, in the meadows, picking flowers, and then Hades coming up and capturing Persephone and dragging her down is symbolizing the soul being entombed in the material world. And just to sort of reiterate something here with regard to Hyperianism, is that yes, in its current state, this planet is like a prison, and avatars are very imprisoning. But it's important to realize that what we do is we want to transform the world. And when we have transformed the world, it changes from something that is negative into something that's very, very positive. Because really, what these avatars do is they allow us to explore the material world, have interactions with each other, and it's sort of like a vehicle. And right now, the world is in a terrible state, and it is very much like a prison. But we can transform this world, and we can, begin to live in a place where it's about expressing ourselves. And then we can use this world and our avatars as like a canvas to paint our picture and express our soul's reality through this medium, through this canvas. So we can begin to actualize our true essence through, this world and our avatar. So really, it's to understand that this world is our playing field. Really, the material world, it's like a blank canvas or a blank book, and we can write any story and paint any picture. Right now, the world has written a horror story and has a chaotic image. But we can do away with all that. We can rewrite the story. We can restart the picture, and we can create something beautiful and brilliant, where we are creating excellency. We are reaching for the stars and bringing forth our divine essence and creating a society of the divine. So it's important to remember that we're not, as Hyperions, we're not escapists. We're not trying to just escape. We are on our way to apotheosis, which means we want to reclaim our position of godhood. We don't want to escape. We don't want to detach. We don't want to deny. We want to engage, actualize, and actualize. So this is our birthright. This is our purpose, is to actualize our true selves, actualize our power, become the gods and goddesses and whatever gender neutral. I like to think of God as being very gender neutral. So becoming the gods of this world and transforming it. So it's not like we're trying to escape and detach, but rather becoming the gods. Because what is a god needs a creation. When we are the creators, and we will begin to create our beautiful new world, first in the physical domain in this world, and then through shared dream spaces. So, where we can literally create and visit each other's worlds. So the gloom and depression of the lesser mysteries represented the agony of the spiritual soul. Yeah, this is great case in point. All right, so the gloom and depression of the lesser mysteries, right, Hades, the underworld, represents the agony of the spiritual soul, unable to express itself because it has accepted the limitations and illusions of the human environment. But we will ultimately be able to overcome these limitations. We'll be able to overcome and become the masters of our environment and become the masters of our avatars. Look at how we're starting to be able to change our avatars, you know? We can choose our clothing, we can choose our hairstyles, we can choose makeup. You know, imagine a time in the future where we can change our bodily image just, you know, instantly. So as we evolve and grow, we become more masters, we become the gods of the physical world, and we will be able to replace that agony of not being able to express with the joy of being able to actualize our true potential. And you can see where we're struggling to do that. Like artists are, you know, true artists are those who are expressing their soul through their music, through their painting and whatnot. Imagine in the future where we can express ourselves not just through music and painting, but entire worlds. And I love, you know, trying to wake up people to this idea of what awaits us if humanity gets its shit together, is that, you know, instead of going to a concert and listening to music or watching something on TV, you can literally step into another world created by someone to experience their world. And you can create your own world and have others experience that. We'll be able to see each other's souls externally reflected in the worlds that we create as gods. So the gloom and depression of the lesser mysteries represented the agony of the spiritual soul, unable to express itself because it has accepted the limitations and illusions of the human environment. The crux of the Eleusinian argument was that man is neither better nor wiser after death than during life. If he does not rise above ignorance during his sojourn here, man goes at death into eternity to wander about forever, making the same mistakes which he makes here. So in Hyperianism, I mean, there's a similarity here, right? So it says that humans are neither better nor wiser after death than during life. You know, some people think that, oh yeah, when you die, you'll just reach the state of enlightenment. But the point is that the point of incarnation is to learn and grow. So if you don't use your time, you know, to learn and grow, you're going to be caught in the cycle of incarnations where you're not making any progress. I've given this example, you know, time and time again, but let's say that you just spend all your lifetimes sitting on a couch and watching Netflix, or, you know, during whatever time you're born in, whatever is the equivalent to that, you know, sitting in the barn and watching your donkeys screw or whatever, I don't know, you know, whatever you do to pass the time at whatever time that you're born in, and if you just sit there and do nothing, well, you can incarnate hundreds of times, but you're not going to make much progress. Whereas someone who incarnates and uses that time to say explore the true nature of reality, they'll make incredible progress very, very quickly and will be that much closer to attaining divinity. And so that's why the Hyperion system is so important, because we have brought together and synthesized all this information together to give you the knowledge and the understanding, then the tools to, you know, have as much optimization as for someone else that would have taken hundreds of lifetimes. You can do in just one lifetime by understanding the Hyperion system. That being said, the Hyperion system is very, very advanced. It's very difficult. So don't be discouraged. You are taking hundreds of lifetimes of information and condensing it into learning this. So again, don't be discouraged, but really see the value here. Really see the value. Hyperionism is almost like a cheat code. It's like getting an insane amount of experience points in one lifetime, where it would take others, hundreds of lifetimes to be able to accumulate this knowledge. So, if he does not outgrow the desire for material possessions here, he will carry it with him into the invisible world, where, because he can never gratify the desire, will continue in endless agony. Dante's Inferno is symbolically descriptive of the sufferings of those who never freed their spiritual natures from the cravings, habits, viewpoints, and limitations of their plutonic personalities. Those who made no endeavor to improve themselves, whose souls have slept during their physical lives, the sleepers, that's why we want to wake up the world. So those who never endeavor to improve themselves, right, that's what I was just talking about. Those who never make no endeavor to improve themselves, those whose souls have slept, they're the sleepers, they're the ignavi. During their physical lives, passed at death into Hades, where, lying in rows, they slept through all eternity as they have slept through life. Now, look, we in Hyperionism, there's no true concept of hell or punishment or damnation or anything like that. You're not going to get punished. You're not going to go to Hades. Don't worry about that. It just means that you didn't make progress, so you're not going to, play the next level. You're not going to level up. That's all it means. So, we don't threaten anyone with hellfire or anything like that. It's just sort of like a video game. If you don't complete level 1, well, you're just going to stay at level 1 until you decide to complete it. And also, I want to point out that in Hyperionism, we don't deny our urges. Okay, so this is incredibly important with regard to the shadow self. We don't deny our shadow self, and you're going to see in a lot of these mystery schools and a lot of these ancient cults and a lot of these ancient secret societies, they taught, and a lot of times, to try and overcome or deny their sort of human animalistic sort of instincts. But in Hyperionism, it's important to understand that you don't want to deny them, you want to integrate them in a healthy way. Because the problem is, if you deny them, they actually don't go away. They just become more condensed and bottled up in your shadow self, and then it can explode into your psyche and wreak havoc. It's sort of like, if you imagine a dam and all the water behind that dam, and you keep, you're actually not getting rid of the water. You're not getting rid of those, of that part of you. You're not getting rid of the shadow. You're just damming it up. And eventually, that dam is going to burst and break, and all of it's going to come crashing down. So the important thing when it comes to the shadow, your shadow self, is not to deny it, as a lot of these mystery schools and cults, taught, but to rather integrate it in a healthy way. And that's a big topic. Definitely check out my videos on interstar actualization and the shadow self. I think I have a whole playlist on that. It's very, very important to realize that whenever you try to deny something, it's just going to have an inverse reaction. So enlightenment is not about denying your dark self, but integrating it and creating a dialogue with it and accepting it as part of you and having it be a part of your life in a healthy way. So that's very important to remember. We are both light and shadow. We are light and shadow guided by the light of reason. We are beyond good and evil. We are the revaluation of all values. We are the new ethic. So, we are the new ethic in the, von Neumann sense. We are beyond good and evil in the Nietzschean sense. So, let's continue here. To the Eleusinian philosophers, birth into the physical world was death in the fullest sense of the word. And the only true birth was that of the spiritual soul of man rising out of the womb of his own fleshly nature. The soul is dead that slumbers, says Longfellow, and in this he strikes the keynote of the Eleusinian Mysteries. and again, you know, you see these people who are the sleepers, and it's like their soul is dead. They're just you know, they're NPCs, non-playing characters. They're on this assembly line life. They're living out a prepackaged life. They're not really themselves. They're not really truly living. They're just like in a dream. They're just following the dream narrative. They're just going along with it. They're not actually being soulful. Now, of course, this is a metaphor. Their soul isn't literally dead. Of course, they have a functioning monad associated with them. Of course they do. But it hasn't realized what it is, hasn't realized what existence is, and it's not actualizing its potential. It's sleeping. It's dormant. So just as Narcissus, gazing at himself in the water, the ancient used this mobile element to symbolize the transitory illusionary material universe, lost his life trying to embrace a reflection, so man, gazing into the mirror of nature and accepting as his real self the senseless clay that he sees reflected, loses the opportunity afforded by physical life to unfold his immortal, invisible self. And so it's important, and this is you know, what I talk about in Hegelianism a lot, that the physical world is our mirror. It's the mirror of God. It's the physical world is, and we are God. Remember, we are Abraxas. We are the absolute. So it's our mirror. So how is it a mirror? Well, when you go to sleep and dream at night, you have a dream. And in your dream, everything in your dream is you, right? All the contents of your dream, that's you. And so you are looking at yourself in a dream. It is your thoughts externalized within you. So this collective dream, it's our thoughts externalized. It's our mirror. Look at everything around. Everything that happens around us is a product of our thoughts. Everything happening in society, everything happening. We are a mind. We are a mind organizing itself. And, you know, just look at all the war and bloodshed we have because the world hasn't properly integrated its shadow or its mirror self or anything like this. You have the world is in a terrible state because it's a mind that's not integrated. And so this mind that's not integrated, this gets reflected in nature, because nature is a reflection of the inner. It's a reflection of you, it's a reflection of us as the absolute. And so we live in a really shitty world because this world is a mind that's not properly integrated. Just like as above, so below. Just like a single person is going to be a very unhealthy person if their psyche is not integrated. They're going to have all this shadow content. They're not going to have their, their mirror self-actualized. They're going to have, it can lead to addiction. It can lead to homophobia. Not integrating the mirror can lead to sexism. Not integrating the power self can make you become subservient and submissive to others who want to control you and all these sorts of things. Right? That's what will happen to a person who's not well integrated. Now, the world is a mind that's not well integrated. And this is why we have sexism and homophobia and hatred and wars and bloodshed and all these sorts of things. All right? Always remember, as above, so below. Always remember that you as the individual is, so is the rest of the world. And that's why we have all these problems. And we need to stop looking at the world as being just gross matter, but as being a reflection of the inner, extended thought, a mirror of the collective psyche, a mirror of the collective unconscious. So it's important to get away from this viewing reality as something being material. Okay? No, reality is not material. Reality is an externalization of thought. All matter around you is unconscious thought. That is what matter around you is. It's the extended representation of unconscious thought. Just like your dream world is the extended representation of your unconscious thought. You have, anxieties. Those anxieties will manifest as characters in your dreams or storms or turbulence. In this world, matter is the extended representation of unconscious thought, and we can consciously manipulate it. And the point is that once we realize what we are, we can begin to collectively transform this world according to our ideas and our thoughts. Nothing is more powerful than an idea whose time has come. Very important quote, and it's true. And we are the idea. We are the idea. It's time to replace materialism with idealism. Idealism. This is a mental world, not a material world, and we can shape it according to our thoughts, our ideas, by making transformations. And this doesn't mean just by thinking about it really hard. This means to actually go out and do it and make change personally and collectively. The you and the land are one. Your inner and the outer are ultimately unified in a feedback loop. They're reflections of one another. So, an ancient initiate once said that the living are ruled by the dead. Only those conversant with the Eleusinian concept of life could understand that statement. It means that the majority of people are not ruled by their living spirits, but by their senseless, hence dead, animal personalities. So what this is saying is that people aren't really moved by their soul, but are rather moved by animalistic instincts. So transmigration and reincarnation were taught in these mysteries, but in a somewhat unusual manner. It was believed that at midnight, the invisible worlds were closest to the terrestrial sphere, and that souls coming into material existence slipped in during the midnight hour. For this reason, many of the Eleusinian ceremonies were performed at midnight. And so to me that sounds like symbolism and metaphor. Many souls coming into the material existence, slipping in during the midnight hour. Well, what is midnight? Midnight is transition, right? You're going from one day to another. It's a transitory period, and we're talking about reincarnation and transition. So right away, to me, I'm thinking it mostly symbolizes transition, right? Not literally it happens at midnight, but to me it seems like this symbolizes a transition. Midnight is very symbolic of transition. We're talking about reincarnation, which is transition from lifetimes, and midnight is a transition from day and night. So real quick, in that example, see what I just did there? And I'm doing this on the fly. This is how one begins to interpret esoteric material, right? Whereas the masses just take it as literal. Oh, at midnight, souls reincarnate or something. But do you see how you can begin to, you look for the inner hidden meaning in the symbol. You think, oh, well, midnight is a transitory period from day to night, and transitory between days. We're talking about reincarnation. Reincarnation is a transition between lifetimes. Perhaps there's something there. Let's look into it further. Let's connect the dots. Let's look at the other things and see if this is so. So some of those sleeping spirits who have failed to awaken their higher natures during the earth life and who now floated around in the invisible worlds, surrounded by a darkness of their own making, occasionally slip through at this hour and assume the forms of various creatures. So just to reiterate, and again, for anyone who is new to Hyperianism, I want to remind you that when we read this sort of thing, it doesn't mean we believe everything that, we're just looking at this stuff as interesting and seeing if we can what we can understand from it. Now, in Hyperianism, your soul is a monad. It's a completely rational mathematical structure. It's not floating around in some void. It's part of the source singularity, which is the realm of frequency. It's a frequency domain with regard to Fourier mathematics. It's perfectly rationally and mathematically defined. It is a singularity. It is outside space and time. It is the domain of frequency, and this being the domain of space-time, the space-time representation of frequency. So just for anyone who might be new, remember we prioritize logic and reason above all else. We don't have this sort of concept of souls floating around or whatnot. So the mystics of Eleusis also laid stress upon the evil of suicide, explaining there was a profound mystery concerning this crime of which they could not speak, but warning their disciples that the great sorrow comes to all who take their own lives. This, in substance, constitutes the esoteric doctrine given to the initiates of the lesser mysteries. As the degree dealt largely with the miseries of those who failed to make the best use of their philosophic opportunities, the chambers of initiation were subterranean and the horrors of Hades were vividly depicted in a complicated ritualistic drama. After passing successfully through the tortuous passageways with their trials and dangers, the candidate received the honorary title of Mystes. This meant one who saw through a veil or had a clouded vision. It also signified the candidate had been brought up to the veil, which would be torn away in the higher degree. The modern word mystic, as referring to a seeker after truth according to the dictates of the heart along the path of faith, is probably derived from this ancient word. For faith is believed in the reality of things unseen or veiled. Now, I want to remind you, we are not mystics. We are not following the path of the heart in faith. We are not mystics. We are Hyperions, and we follow the path of logic and reason. Doesn't mean we deny emotions. It just means that we understand that emotions don't reveal truth. Logic and reason is the guiding function. It's the highest faculty of mind. And that it's not faith that will reveal the unseen world to us, but it is reason. Only reason can access the noumenal existence, reality in itself. Why? Because this is a mathematical reality. Mathematics is the perfect expression of reason. Mathematics and reason are equivalent. Mathematics is a system of reason. We are mathematical beings, which means we are beings of reason. We are mathematical beings. And so we use what we are, our inner essence, to access true reality. We are mathematical beings, so we use mathematics and reason to access true reality. We're not made out of faith. Faith isn't our essence. We are mathematical frequency. So we understand the frequency-based nature of existence. And through that, we understand our true selves and our eternal selves, because that's what we are. And that's truly how one lifts the veil. Because there will always be a veil between you and truth if you have in between it anything else other than what you are, right? If you have, there's a veil here, and you're on one side, truth is on the other side, but you are what is true, but you won't realize it until you use your own essence of what you are to understand it. So anything else in between, symbolism, metaphor, faith, all this is ultimately stands in between. And while metaphor can help you, it's sort of like training wheels, right? They're sort of like training wheels. They help you at first. They're like crutches that help at first. And metaphor and allegory can make life very, very rich. But ultimately, to get rid of truth, to peer behind the veil, to pull back the curtain, is to understand reality as it truly is by your own essence, which is the essence of the universe. Aristotle said that God was pure self-thinking thought. And ultimately, that's what will actualize our divinity as that's what we are. We are self-thinking thought. We can't get away from thought. This is a dream world. So we are always thought reflecting upon itself in some way. Right now, looking at all of these objects around you, you are reflecting on thought. It's the extended representation of thought, but ultimately to get to pure truth in itself is thought thinking about itself in its purity. And Hegel referred to this sort of as valid thinking about valid thinking. Valid thought reflecting upon valid thought. And this was in his idea of the logic. So Hegel has this idea of reality, true reality, being this rational structure that generates from its rational structure a material world, and then it uses this material world to understand what it is, and then finally step into a communal consciousness through what he calls absolute spirit or absolute mind, which is abraxas, which is the absolute, which is all of us forming this network, this collective in understanding what we are and actualizing our true selves, creating a society of the divine and awakening the absolute, abraxas. The greater mysteries. We just talked about the lesser mysteries of the Eleusinian Mysteries. Now the greater mysteries, into which the candidate was admitted only after he had successfully passed through the ordeals of the lesser, and not always even then, were sacred to Ceres, the mother of Persephone, and represent her as wandering through the world in quest of her abducted daughter. Ceres carried two torches, intuition and reason, to aid her in the search for her lost child, the soul. It's really interesting, is it not? At last, she found Persephone, not far from Eleusis, and out of gratitude taught the people that to cultivate corn, which is sacred to her. She also founded the Mysteries. Ceres appeared before Pluto, god of the souls of the dead, and pleaded with him to allow Persephone to return her home. This the god at first refused to do, because Persephone had eaten of the pomegranate, the fruit of mortality. At last, however, he compromised and agreed to permit Persephone to live in the upper world half of the year if she would stay with him in the darkness of Hades for the remaining half. So, here we have this idea of Persephone being symbolic of the soul, and then you have Hades taking Persephone down into the underworld, which is symbolic for the soul being trapped in matter and falling into falling for the illusion of the material world. And then you have the mother of Persephone wandering through the world in quest of her abducted daughter. And to me, this sounds like a symbol for the higher self. And the mother carries 2 torches to look for her daughter: intuition and reason. And this is really important because we just talked about this very, very recently. Intuition and reason. And this is why in Hyperianism, we talk about reason so much. And we talked about this recently. The intuition is incredibly powerful, but it must be filtered and guided through reason. And that's where the New Age goes really wrong. They get rid of their torch of reason. And so they end up going insane because all they have is intuition and nothing to guide it. Nothing to guide it. It's like being on a sea without the sail. The sail is so without a sail, without a rudder, without a steering wheel, right? Sailless, rudderless, without a steering wheel. That's what only having intuition is like. Now, of course, you need that. If you didn't have the sea, well, guess what? Your ship wouldn't go anywhere. Intuition is incredibly important, but you need the sail, you need the rudder, you need the steering wheel, you need to be able to guide it, or else you're going to get thrashed and torn asunder on the rocks and will be destroyed. So that's why the torch of reason is so important. And this is a huge demarcating feature from us and the irrational New Age, which abolishes reason by making truth subjective. They say that truth is subjective and relative, which is the abolishing of truth, which is the opposite of enlightenment. So we must have that truth of that torch of reason. So the Greeks believed that Persephone was a manifestation of the solar energy, which in the winter months lived under the earth with Pluto, but in the summer returned again with the goddess of productiveness. There is a legend that the flowers loved Persephone, and that every year when she left for the dark realms of Pluto, the plants and shrubs would die of grief. While the profane and uninitiated had their own opinions on these subjects, the truth of the Greek allegories remained safely concealed by the priests who alone recognized the sublimity of these great philosophic and religious parables. Thomas Taylor epitomizes the doctrines of the greater mysteries in the following statement. The greater mysteries obscurely intimated by mystic and splendid visions the felicity of the soul both here and hereafter when purified from the defilement of a material nature and constantly elevated to the realities of intellectual spiritual vision. So, just as the lesser mysteries discuss the prenatal epoch of man, when the consciousness in its 9 days was descending into the realm of illusion and assuming the veil of unreality, the greater mysteries discuss the principles of spiritual regeneration and revealed to initiates not only the simplest but also the most direct and complete method of liberating their higher natures from the bondage of material ignorance. Like Prometheus, chained to the top of Mount Caucasus, man's higher nature is chained to his inadequate personality. The 9 days of initiation were also symbolic of the 9 spheres through which the human soul descends during the process of assuming a terrestrial form. The secret exercises for spiritual unfoldment given to disciples of the higher degrees are unknown, but there is every reason to believe that they were similar to the Brahmanic mysteries, since it is known that the Eleusinian ceremonies were close with the Sanskrit words nox om pax. That part of the allegory referring to the 2 6-month periods, during one of which Persephone must remain with Pluto, while during which the other she may revisit the upper world, offers material for deep consideration. It is probable that the Eleusinians realized that the soul left the body during sleep, or at least was made capable of leaving by the special training which undoubtedly they were in a position to give. Thus Persephone would remain as the queen of Pluto's realm during the waking hours, but would ascend to the spiritual worlds during the periods of sleep. The initiate was taught how to intercede with Pluto to permit Persephone, the initiate's soul, to ascend from darkness of his material nature into the light of understanding. When thus freed from the shackles of clay and crystallized concepts, the initiate was liberated not only for the period of his life, but for all eternity, for never thereafter was he divested of those soul qualities which after death were his vehicles for manifestation and expression in the so-called heaven world. Now, to me, it seems that this idea of descending into Hades and then to spending time in the true world for a time, Manly P. Hall is talking about its sleep cycles. To me, it sounds like having more to do with reincarnation. That's what I would take away from it. If Persephone represents the soul, and descending into Hades is descending into the material world, but if Persephone is allowed to visit the true world every once in a while, before going into the cycle of descent and ascent, descent and ascent, descent and ascent, this again seems to me like a cycle of reincarnation. To me, this seems like a cycle of reincarnation. In contrast to the idea of Hades as a state of darkness below, the gods were said to inhabit the top of mountains, a well-known example being Mount Olympus, where the 12 deities of the Greek pantheon were said to dwell together. In his initiatory wanderings, the neophyte therefore entered chambers of ever-increasing brilliancy to portray the ascent of the spirit from the lower worlds into the realms of bliss. As the climax to such wanderings, he entered a great vaulted room, in the center which stood a brilliantly illumined statue of the goddess Ceres. Here, in the presence of the Hierophant, and surrounded by priests in magnificent robes, he was instructed in the highest of the secret mysteries of the Eleusis. At the conclusion of this ceremony, he was hailed as an epoptis, which means one who has beheld or seen directly. For this reason, also initiation was termed autopsy. The apoptes was then given certain sacred books, probably written in cipher code, together with tablets of stone on which secret instructions were engraved. In The Obelisk in Freemasonry, John A. Weiss describes the officiating personages of the Eleusinian Mysteries as consisting of a male and female hierophant who directed the initiations, a male and female torchbearer, a male herald, and a male and a female altar attendant. There was also numerous minor officials. He states that according to Porphyry, the hierophant represents Plato's demiurgos, or creator of the world, the torchbearer the sun, the altarman the moon, the herald Hermes or Mercury, and the other officials minor stars. From the records available, a number of strange and apparently supernatural phenomena accompanied the rituals. Many initiates claim to have actually seen the living gods themselves. Whether this was the result of religious ecstasy or the actual cooperation of invisible powers with the visible priests must remain a mystery. In the Metamorphosis or Golden Ass, Apuleius thus describes what in all probability is his initiation into the Eleusinian Mysteries. I approached to the confines of death, and having trod on the threshold of Proserpine, I returned from it, being carried through all the elements. At midnight I saw the sun shining with a splendid light, and I manifestly drew near to the gods beneath and the gods above, and proximately adored them. So, let me explain this element here. So in the Eleusinian Mysteries, right, they talk about people being able to have experienced the gods and things like this. So in the Eleusinian Mysteries, a part of it was that they were given this drink to drink from. And it is theorized that this drink contained ergot, that it was an ergot brew. Now what is ergot? Ergot is a fungi from which LSD is derived. So it is possible, this is acid, LSD, acid. So it is possible that this brew, as part of the Eleusinian Mysteries, were giving the initiates an LSD trip. And some have said, right, that, okay, well, they were bound by secrecy as well, right? So they were bound by secrecy, and some have said that this particular aspect, they were only allowed to do this once in their lifetime. This is what some people have said. So if that is true, imagine it. Imagine that, you know, you are a person, and you go through the initiation of the Eleusinian Mysteries. You're now bound by secrecy, and you partake in this brew, which gives you an LSD trip. And for anyone who has an LSD trip, you know how mind-blowing that is. So imagine being someone in the ancient world, once in your life, having this mind-blowing experience, and then being bound to secrecy. Imagine how earth-shattering, how strange that would be. And Plato was highly influenced by the Eleusinian Mysteries. And he was also influenced by the Pythagorean mystery school, the mystery cult. The Pythagoreans were all about mathematics. And then if you have this idea that the Eleusinians possibly provided LSD, you know, ergot, but an LSD-like experience, you can see how Plato's work would then be influenced. And this is a great way to show the pairing of sort of intuition and reason, because through Pythagoras you have this beautiful, sublime system of reason, of mathematics, and then through the Eleusinian Mysteries you have this intuitive experience. And if this is indeed true, you can see how Plato had this great intuitive experience and then used the power of logic and reason and mathematics to construct a brilliant system. Plato's domain of forms, the idea that this reality is just a shadow of the true reality, that the true reality is a domain of perfect forms, perfect Platonic forms. And if you start getting into the Timaeus and things like this, this includes geometry, geometric forms, all of reality partaking in these things. So, really, really interesting. But always to, see the power that these mystery schools have. And I think it's really important, again, to show how important logic and reason is. Because guess what? You could have someone who perhaps were to partake in the Eleusinian Mysteries and have this trip, and they wouldn't know what it's about. They'd just be like, oh, wow, I saw the gods. I don't really know what it is that I saw, but I saw the gods. And then you have someone like Plato, who through his experience of and understanding and knowledge of Pythagoreanism, logic, mathematics, was able to truly construct a grand system. So that is the power of being in the ocean, but having a steering wheel and a rudder and being able to navigate as well, and not being thrown asunder onto the rocks. So the importance of logic and reason as the guiding function cannot be stressed enough. So women and children were admitted to the Eleusinian Mysteries, and at one time there were literally thousands of initiates. Because this vast host was not prepared for the highest spiritual and mystical doctrines, a division necessarily took place within the society itself. The higher teachings were given to only a limited number of initiates who, because of superior mentality, showed a comprehensive grasp of their underlying philosophical concepts. Socrates refused to be initiated into the Eleusinian Mysteries. For knowing its principles without being a member of the order, he realized that membership would seal his tongue. He didn't want to be bound by secrecy. That the mysteries of Eleusis were based upon the great and eternal truths is attested by the veneration in which they were held by the great minds of the ancient world. M. Overoff asks, would Pindar, Plato, Cicero, Epictetus have spoken of them with such admiration if the Hierophant had satisfied himself with loudly proclaiming his own opinions of those of his order? The garments in which candidates were initiated were preserved for many years and were believed to possess almost sacred properties. Just as the soul can have no covering save wisdom and virtue, so the candidates, being as yet without true knowledge, were presented to the mysteries unclothed, being first given the skin of an animal, and later a consecrated robe to symbolize the philosophical teachings received by the initiate. During the course of initiation, the candidate passed through two gates. The first led downward into the lower worlds and symbolized his birth into ignorance. The second led upward into a room of brilliantly lighted by unseen lamps, in which was the statue of Ceres, which symbolized the upper world or the abode of light and truth. Strabo states that the great temple of Eleusis would hold between 20 and 30,000 people. The caves dedicated to Zarathustra also had these two doors, symbolizing the avenues of birth and death. The following paragraph from Porphyry gives a fairly adequate conception of Eleusinian symbolism. God, being a luminous principle, residing in the midst of the most subtle fire, he remains forever invisible to the eyes of those who do not elevate themselves above material life. On this account, the sight of transparent bodies, such as crystal, Parian marble, and even ivory, recalls the idea of divine light, as the sight of gold excites an idea of its purity, for gold cannot be sullied. Some have thought by a black stone was signified the invisibility of the divine essence. To express supreme reason, the divinity was represented under the human form, and beautiful, for God is the source of beauty of different ages and in various attitudes, sitting or upright, of one or the other sex, as a virgin or a young man, a husband or a bride, that all shades and gradations might be marked. Everything luminous was subsequently attributed to the gods, the sphere and all that is spherical to the universe, to the sun and the moon, sometimes to fortune and to hope, the circle and all circular figures to eternity, to the celestial movements, to the circles and zones of the heavens, the sections of circles to the phases of the moon, and pyramids and obelisks to the igneous principle, and through that to the gods of heaven. A cone expresses the sun, a cylinder the earth, the phallus and triangle designate generation. The Eleusinian Mysteries, according to Hecthorn, survived all others and did not cease to exist as an institution until nearly 400 years after Christ, when they were finally suppressed by Theodosius, who cruelly destroyed all who did not accept the Christian faith. Of this greatest of all philosophical institutions, Cicero said that it has taught men not only how to live, but also how to die. So once again, you see that this amazing culture, these Eleusinian mysteries that held the torch of intuition and of reason, that all the great philosophers of that time, not all, but many of the great philosophers of that time spoke incredibly highly of, that influenced Plato, destroyed by Theodosius, and destroyed all who did not accept the Christian faith. You see the darkness of faith destroying the light of understanding, of philosophy, of truth, of reason. It's this common theme that exists to this day. Look at all that is being destroyed by the values injected by an old archaic system, the system of Christianity. Women losing their rights, the suppression of LGBTQ, the war on women. Very recently, we're seeing that on Instagram. And all of this toxicity has its roots in this old religion that has continuously been waging a war on reason, a war on expression, a war on many of the elements that make life worth living. So, let's remember that. Let's remember that we are guided by logic and reason and are vehemently opposed to these destroyers of truth. These terrible ideas. Okay, So that was the Eleusinian Mysteries. Extremely interesting, extremely intriguing, and perhaps I'll do a video in the future more discussing Plato's ideas that were influenced by them and whatnot. But now let us continue to the Orphic Mysteries. Orpheus, the Thracian bard, the great initiator of the Greeks, ceased to be known as a man and was celebrated as a divinity several centuries before the Christian era. So we're discussing now the Orphic cult. As to Orpheus himself, writes Thomas Taylor, scarcely a vestige of his life is to be found among the immense ruins of time. For who has ever been able to affirm anything with certainty of his origin, his age, his country, and condition? This alone may be depended on, from general assent, that there formerly lived a person named Orpheus, who was the founder of theology among the Greeks, the institutor of their lives and morals, the first of prophets, and the prince of poets, himself the offspring of a muse, who taught the Greeks their sacred rites and mysteries, and from whose wisdom, as from a perennial and abundant fountain, the divine muse of Homer, and the sublime theology of Pythagoras and Plato flowed. So Orpheus was founder of the Grecian mythological system, which he used as the medium for the promulgation of his philosophical doctrines. The origin of his philosophy is uncertain. He may have gotten it from the Brahmins, there being legends to the effect that he got it was a Hindu. It's worded oddly. His name possibly being derived from a word meaning dark. Orpheus was initiated into the Egyptian mysteries, from which he secured extensive knowledge of magic, astrology, sorcery, and medicine. The mysteries of the Kabiri at Samothrace were also conferred upon him, and these undoubtedly contributed to his knowledge of medicine and music. The romance of Orpheus and Eurydice is one of the tragic episodes of Greek mythology and apparently constitutes the astounding feature of the Orphic rite. Eurydice, in her attempt to escape from a villain seeking to seduce her, died from the venom of a poisonous serpent, which stung her in the heel. Orpheus, penetrating to the very heart of the underworld, so charmed Pluto and Persephone with the beauty of his music that they agreed to permit Eurydice to return to life if Orpheus could lead her back to the sphere of the living without once looking around to see if she were following. So great was his fear, however, that he would stray from him, that she would stray from him, that he turned his head, and Eurydice with a heartbroken cry was swept back into the land of the dead. So Orpheus wandered the earth, and there are several conflicting accounts of the manner of his death. Some declare that he was slain by a bolt of lightning. Others that, failing to save his beloved Eurydice, he committed suicide. The generally accepted version of his death, however, is that he was torn to pieces by Ciconian women whose advances he had spurned. In the 10th book of Plato's Republic, it is declared that because of his sad fate at the hands of women, the soul that he had once been Orpheus, upon being destined to live again in the physical world, chose rather to return in the body of a swan than be born of woman. That's horrible. That's terrible. Anyway, the head of Orpheus, after being torn from his body, was cast with his lyre into the river Hebrus, down which it floated to the sea, where, wedging in a cleft in a rock, it gave oracles for many years. The lyre, after being stolen from its shrine and working the destruction of the thief, was picked up by the gods and fashioned into a constellation. Okay, let me make something real quick here, okay? Because down here it's going to say Orpheus was declared to be the son of Apollo. And remember how I told you that Manly P. Hall gets some things wrong? Now, I don't know if Manly P. Hall got this particular thing wrong or not. I'm just going to say that I've read up on the Orphic cult previously. And I'm seeing some conflicting things. I don't know if maybe this is just a different interpretation or whatnot. But here's what I know and what I have also read about the Orphic cult. Was that Orpheus and the Orphic cult, yes, was based on Apollo, which means it had to do with logic and reason. However, how did Orpheus die? Orpheus was torn asunder by women, and from my studies, he was torn asunder by the followers of Dionysus, the Maenads, the Bacchae. And what this meant was that later on, because of this, in the Orphic cult, they then incorporated Dionysus into it. So Dionysus is sort of the opposite of Apollo. Apollo is that of logic and reason. Dionysus is indulgence, experience, music, performance art, things like this, of this nature. So the idea is, and this has to do with shadow integration as well, that basically Orpheus didn't integrate his shadow, didn't pay Dionysus his dues, so was torn asunder by Dionysus, the followers of Dionysus, which were the Maenads. The female followers of Dionysus. Dionysus himself being androgynous. And so the idea was that Orpheus, in the Orphic cult, they then incorporated Dionysus into it, basically acknowledging this other element. This is what I have had heard. Now, the reason why I think maybe we're going to read about the Dionysian cult right after Orpheus, but as you're going to see, Manly P. Hall really doesn't like the Dionysian cult. The Dionysian cult is extremely important. Dionysus can represent the shadow. But you're going to see that Manly P. Hall kind of has a low view of the Dionysian cult. And this is perhaps why it has influenced some of this writing. But I want to emphasize the importance of Dionysus. But anyway, I just wanted to say this real quick and point this out. Anyway, Orpheus has long been sung as the patron of music. On his 7-stringed lyre, he played such perfect harmonies that the gods themselves were moved to acclaim his power. When he touched the strings of his instrument, the birds and the beasts gathered about him. And as he wandered through the forest with his enchanting melodies, causing even the ancient trees, with mighty effort, to draw their gnarled roots from out of the earth and follow him. Orpheus is one of the many immortals who have sacrificed themselves that mankind might have the wisdom of the gods. By the symbolism of his music, he communicated divine secrets to humanity, and several authors have declared that the gods, though loving him, feared that he would overshadow their kingdom and therefore reluctantly encompassed his destruction. As time passed on, the historical Orpheus became hopelessly confounded with the doctrine he represented, and eventually thus became the symbol of the Greek school of ancient wisdom. Thus Orpheus was declared to be the son of Apollo, the divine and perfect truth, and Calliope, the muse of harmony and rhythm. In other words, Orpheus is the secret doctrine, Apollo revealed through music. Eurydice is humanity dead from the sting of the serpent of false knowledge and imprisoned in the underworld of ignorance. In this allegory, Orpheus signifies theology, which wins her from the king of the dead but fails to accomplish his resurrection because it falsely estimates and mistrusts the innate understanding within the human soul. The Ciconian women who tore Orpheus limb from limb symbolize the various contending theological factions which destroyed the body of truth. Again, from my understanding, it was the Maenads, the Bacchae, that tore Orpheus asunder for denying Dionysus. They cannot accomplish this, however, until their discordant cries drown out the harmony drawn by Orpheus from his magic lyre. The head of Orpheus signifies the esoteric doctrine of his cult. These doctrines continue to live and speak even after his body has been destroyed. The lyre is the secret teaching of Orpheus. The 7 strings are the 7 divine truths, which are the keys to universal knowledge. The differing accounts of his death represent the various means used to destroy the secret teachings. Wisdom can die in many ways at the same time. The allegory of Orpheus incarnating in the white swan merely signifies the spiritual truths he promulgated will continue and will be taught by the illumined initiates of all future ages. The swan is the symbol of the initiates of the mysteries. It is a symbol also of the divine power, which is the progenitor of the world. Okay, now we're going to talk about the Bacchic and Dionysic rites. So Dionysus, you have Bacchus and Dionysus. What's the difference? Really, they're the same. Bacchus is just the Roman version of Dionysus. So when you hear of Bacchus and Dionysus, they're essentially the same. The Bacchae and the Maenads, they're the same thing. They're the female followers of Dionysus or Bacchus. So now we're talking about the Dionysian rites. And we're going to learn some interesting things here, but I want to point out that Manly P. Hall is very biased towards these Dionysian rites, and I don't really like that. Not a big fan of that, because the Dionysian rites are extremely important, very, very important, and it also represents a very powerful feminine portion of existence. I don't really like talking about gender with regard to this, but when we're talking about symbols and metaphor, but also androgyny as well, Dionysus himself, or themselves, I would think Dionysus would probably have gender-neutral pronouns, being androgynous. But anyway, the Bacchic rite, or Dionysian rite, around the allegory of the youthful Bacchus, Dionysus, being torn to pieces by the Titans. So these giants accomplished the destruction of Bacchus, or Dionysus, by causing him to become fascinated by his own image in a mirror. After dismembering him, the Titans first boiled the pieces in water and afterwards roasted them. Pallas rescued the heart of the murdered god, and by this precaution, Bacchus, or Dionysus, was enabled to spring forth again in all his former glory. Again, you see a god that was slain and then resurrected. We're going to see a lot of interesting similarities also between Dionysus and Christ, as a lot of these myths have very similar themes. So Jupiter, the Demiurgus, beholding the crime of the Titans, hurled his thunderbolts and slew them, burning their bodies to ashes with heavenly fire. Out of the ashes of the Titan, which also contained a portion of the flesh of Bacchus, Dionysus, whose body they have partly devoured, the human race was created. Thus the mundane life of every man was said to contain a portion of the Bacchic life, or the Dionysian life. For this reason, the Greek mysteries warned against suicide. He who attempts to destroy himself raises his hand against the nature of the Dionysus within him, since man's body is indirectly the tomb of this god, and consequently must be preserved with the greatest care. Dionysus represents the rational soul of the inferior world. He is the chief of the Titans, the artificer of the mundane spheres. The Pythagoreans called him the Titanic monad. Thus Bacchus is the all-inclusive idea of the Titanic sphere, and the Titans, or gods, of the fragments, the active agencies by means of which universal substance is fashioned into the pattern of this idea. The Bacchic state signifies the unity of the rational soul in a state of self-knowledge. The Titanic state, the diversity of the rational soul, which, being scattered throughout creation, loses the consciousness of its own essential oneness. The mirror into which Dionysus gazes, and which is the cause of his fall, is the great sea of illusion, the lower world fashioned by the Titans. Dionysus, seeing his image before him, accepts the image as a likeness of himself and ensouls the likeness, that is, the rational idea ensouls its reflection, the irrational universe. By ensouling the irrational image, it implants in it the urge to become like its source, the rational image. Therefore the ancients said that man does not know the gods by logic or by reason, but rather by realizing the presence of the gods within himself. Now, I'm going to... This is a very short section, and I'm just going to read this before commenting on it, because there's a lot I want to say about this, especially what Manly P. Hall has to say about it. Here's one thing I want to say. If you're going for information on the Dionysian mystery schools, don't go to Manly P. Hall. But let me just finish this up here, and then I'll put my comments. So after Bacchus, or Dionysus, gazed into the mirror and followed his own reflection into matter, the rational soul of the world was broken up and distributed by the Titans throughout the mundane sphere, of which it is the essential nature, but the heart or source of it they could not. The Titans took the dismembered body of Bacchus, Dionysus, and boiled it in water, symbol of the immersion in the material universe, which represents the incorporation of the Dionysian principle in form. The pieces were afterwards roasted to signify the subsequent ascension of the spiritual nature out of form. When Jupiter, the father of Dionysus and the demiurgus of the universe, saw that the Titans were hopelessly involving the rational or divine idea by scattering its members through the constituent parts of the lower world, he slew the Titans in order that the divine idea might not be entirely lost. From the ashes of the Titans he formed mankind, whose purpose of existence was to preserve and eventually release the Dionysian idea, or rational soul, from the Titanic fabrication. Jupiter, being the demiurgus and fabricator of the material universe, is the third person of the creative triad, consequently the Lord of Death, for death exists only in the lower sphere of being over which he presides. Disintegration takes place so that reintegration may follow upon a higher level form of intelligence. The thunderbolts of Jupiter are emblematic of his disintegrative power. They reveal the purpose of death, which is to rescue the rational soul from the devouring power of the rational nature. I know I'm reading kind of fast here, but there's literally just a couple more paragraphs, and I want to get them done with so I can comment on it. So man is a composite creature, his lower nature consisting of the fragments of the Titans and his higher nature the sacred immortal flesh of Bacchus. Therefore man is capable of either a Titanic irrational or Bacchic rational existence. The Titans of Hesiod, who were 12 in number, are probably analogous to the celestial zodiac, where the Titans who murdered and dismembered Bacchus represents the zodiacal powers distorted by their involvement in the material world. Thus Bacchus represented the sun, who is dismembered by the signs of the zodiac and from whose body the universe is formed. When the terrestrial forms were created from the various parts of his body, the sense of wholeness was lost and the sense of separateness established. The heart of Bacchus, which was saved by Pallas or Minerva, was lifted out of the four elements symbolized by his dismembered body and placed in the ether. The heart of Bacchus is the immortal center of the rational soul. After the rational soul has been distributed throughout the creation and nature of man, the Bacchic mysteries were instituted for the purpose of disentangling it from the irrational, Titanic nature. Thus, this disentanglement was the process of lifting the soul out of the state of separateness into that of unity. The various parts and members of Bacchus were collected from the different corners of the earth. When all rational parts were gathered, Bacchus is resurrected. The rites of Dionysus were very similar to those of Bacchus, and by many these two gods are considered as one. Statues of Dionysus were carried in the Eleusinian Mysteries, especially the lesser degrees. Bacchus, representing the soul of the mundane sphere, was capable of infinite multiplicity of form and designations. Dionysus apparently was his solar aspect. The Dionysian architects constituted an ancient secret society in principles and doctrines, much like the modern Freemasonic order. They were an organization of builders bound together by their secret knowledge of the relationship between the earthly and divine sciences of architectonics. They were supposedly employed by King Solomon in the building of his temple, although they were not Jews, nor did they worship the god of the Jews, being followers of Bacchus and Dionysus. The Dionysiac architects erected many of the great monuments of antiquity. They possessed a secret language and a system of marking their stones. They had annual convocations and sacred feasts. The exact nature of their doctrines is unknown. It is believed that Hiram Abiff was an initiate of this society. Okay, I know I read that fast, but let me talk about this here because, look, there's a lot of contradictions according here. So I would not, if you want to know about the Dionysian mysteries, I would not get it from Manly P. Hall. Because even right here, he says the Dionysian architects constitute an ancient secret society about building, architecture, and things like this. This is highly unlikely. The Dionysians, it's most likely that the Orphics were involved in architecture. It would be much more likely that the Orphics were involved in architecture. Dionysians were extremely chaotic. Dionysians represent, in a large part, the shadow. And it represents immersion into material existence. It represents indulgence. You would have, and the rites of Dionysus, you can see here where he briefly mentions this. Let me see if I can find it. At the time, the Bacchic rites were of a higher order, but later they became much degraded. The Bacchanalia, or orgies of Bacchus, are famous in literature. So he even talks about how the Bacchic, how these were degrading. We do not consider these things degrading. And he said some disparaging things about the Dionysian rites, I think in our last reading or the reading previous to this one. So he looks down. What's important to understand is that the Dionysian Mysteries, okay, were led by Dionysus, represented by Dionysus, this androgynous being. Most of the followers were female, but also had male followers as well. And it was about experience. And so they would engage in these mysteries of where they would combine all sensuous elements together: music, orgy, intoxication, performance art, pain, pleasure, all possible stimulations, until they would get into almost like this hypnotic state, and they would experience this ecstatic state, a state of ecstasy, where they experience the God within through indulgence. And we have to thank, for the Dionysians, we have to thank the modern ideas of theater, plays, and concerts. And again, I've talked about this before. If you go to a music concert, this is very similar to the Dionysian rites. There's, intoxicants. There's sexuality occurring in say, like, there's mosh pits. There's even perhaps violence. There's music happening. There's this sort of rhythmic idea. And I'm sure that you get into this like trance-like state where you feel this like power within you, right? So that's all thanks to the Dionysian Mysteries. So the Dionysian Mysteries were these chaotic, wild, indulgent, almost like great parties, and which is completely different. And these people would not be interested in architecture. It's much more likely that it was the Orphics that were interested in architecture. So you can see that we do not look down upon the Dionysian Mysteries. They are extremely important. We must be led by logic and reason, but we do not deny our shadow self, or else it will tear you apart. We integrate the shadow. We integrate Dionysus. We want to experience life. That's not what life is all about. Life is about, we don't want to make life all about, just mindless indulgence, mindless experience, but it's very powerful and very important. We must be led by logic and reason, but embrace Dionysus. And this is where you get the allegory of the Orphics, where the Orphics were about logic and reason, but guess what happened? Orpheus was torn apart by the female followers of Dionysus because Dionysus was denied. Guess what happens? That's like what happens when you deny your shadow self. When you deny your shadow self, you repress it, you repress it, you repress it. Your shadow self is going to tear you apart. You don't want to repress it. You want to integrate it. And that's why later on in the Orphic cult, guess what they did? They integrated the Dionysian rites later. So to be able to sort of pay Dionysus his dues. You don't want to deny the divinity of Dionysus, or Dionysus will tear you apart. You want to pay Dionysus their dues. But the idea is not too little or not too much. Same thing with the shadow, right? Not too little, not too much. Dionysus, not too little, not too much. Too little, you oppress it, will destroy you. Too much, you become possessed. You go mad, and you'll be destroyed. Either way. So, but we also what we do have some interesting ideas is the correlation between Dionysus and some ideas of Christ. So Godfrey Higgins conclusively establishes Dionysus as one of the early pagan forms of the Christian myth. The birthplace of Dionysus, called Sabazius or Sabaoth, was claimed by several places in Greece, but on Mount Zelmasus in Thrace, his worship seemed to have been chiefly celebrated. He was born of a virgin on the 25th of December. He performed great miracles for the good of mankind, particular one in which he changed water into wine. He rode in a triumphal procession on a donkey. He was put to death by the Titans and rose again from the dead on the 25th of March. He was always called the Savior. In his mysteries, he was known to the people as an infant is by the Christians at this day on Christmas Day morning in Rome. So huge parallels to the Christian mythos. with Dionysus. And wouldn't that be wonderful, right? On Christmas, should we not, instead of let's take the Christ out of Christmas and let us celebrate Dionysus. Let us celebrate Dionysian revelry. That's what we want to do. That's what we very much did last year when we had our Shadow Season event. We couldn't do it this year because of COVID, but that's what we did last year. We had an event that incorporated performance art at a club with BDSM. We had our New Terra event, all right? And this is about, celebrating Dionysus. It's time to take the Christ out of Christmas. But anyway, the idea here is that, yes, we don't want to be led by Dionysus. We want to be led by logic and reason, but we want to integrate and have great respect for Dionysus. Just like we don't want to be led by our shadow. We don't want our shadow to lead us. No, our reason, our rational function leads us, but we want to integrate the shadow. That is what we can learn from these allegory of Dionysus. And so Manly P. Hall gets quite a lot wrong here. So it's important to understand that. But this is the true understanding of, Hyperionism and whatnot, is that we do not deny Dionysus. If you deny Dionysus, like Orpheus, you're going to be torn apart. And I speak a lot about this in my book, The Path of Shadow. We talk about this. And we'll do a reading at some point of another very interesting story called the Bacchae, where King Pentheus refuses to accept Dionysus into his kingdom. He denies the divinity of Dionysus. Well, guess what he ends up doing? He ends up going mad, and he ends up getting his head cut off because he denied the divinity of Dionysus. And when you do that, your shadow, there's a lot more to it, representing that Pentheus actually wanted to indulge. He would secretly spy on the Dionysian cult because it was like an orgiastic filled with, he would spy on the orgies because he was secretly enthralled by them. But at the same time, he wanted to deny them, right? You see this a lot when it comes to the shadow. Just like we talked about, that individual who had anti-LGBTQ policies, right? That politician who had anti-LGBTQ policies, but was then caught in a 25-man orgy. That's King Pentheus, who refused to accept Dionysus, refused to accept what he is, and instead spied on these orgies of Dionysus and ended up getting his head cut off and torn apart for sullying, bringing. No, you're not going to accept who we are. You're going to come to us in darkness and in hiding. No, forget you. So you can see in these, we're going to, so the reason why I'm talking about this in such a way is because like Manly P. Hall just does a really poor job here. And I have it's very important to me how Dionysus is represented and symbolically represented in things like the Bacchae of Euripides and the Orphic cult. And it's such a perfect example of the need to accept the shadow and to be able to enjoy parts of the human experience while being led by logic and reason. So, anyway, I hope you enjoyed this. We took a look at the 3 different cults today. The Eleusinian cult, and then we looked at the Orphic and the Dionysian cults as well. And it seemed like some things were an error in the Orphic and quite a bit in the Dionysian, but still really interesting. I will do videos in the future on the cult of Dionysus to really be able to get this out here. But I hope you guys enjoyed this. We are going to continue our reading next week, unless we take a break and start a new book. We'll see. I'm not sure yet. But it very much depends. But I hope you enjoy this and are beginning to see how it's very, very interesting how these ideas were veiled in secrecy, but how we can learn from these symbols, right? How, like talking about Dionysus, like that's a great symbol for the shadow self and creating Dionysian zones and all that. That's great. We just don't want to take it literal. We don't want to think that there's actually a Dionysus out there that we worship, and we don't want to go to war with people because someone worshipped Dionysus and the other person worships Zeus or something. That's silly. But when we understand myths as myths, there's a lot we can learn from them, and they can be used as stepping stones to get to the truth in itself. You know, if it's difficult for some to understand depth psychology and shadow integration, they might first understand it through, you know, the story of Dionysus and whatnot. Might help, as long as you understand the story as a story. And then from there, we can start talking about real, you know, truly in itself what integrating the psyche is, and shadow integration and shadow possession, and then move on to the mirror self and the power self and all these sorts of things. So I hope you guys enjoyed that, and we will be continuing next week.